Okay, I want to welcome everybody to our first official program lecture of the semester, and our first series, which is really about our alumni. And so again, we've invited different alumni to come back to talk in a topical area. And those of you that have taken my classes in the past know that I firmly believe that the history of places and people matter. And so we have today, History Matters. And our speakers, their names are going to be really easy to remember because they're both Glenn. So we call them the Glens, maybe, but not as that beautiful picture of the Glen was just a moment ago. But Glenn Oder, who's with the Fort Monroe Authority, and Glenn Stock, who has his own private practice, Stock LLC, in Asheville. And they'll probably give you a little bit more introduction into themselves, and it's appropriate that they should do that themselves. So please, let's welcome Glenn and Glenn.
Yeah, I think I'll do first. Yeah. Everyone can hear me? Let's go ahead and get started. Glenn Stack, as Terry mentioned, Asheville, North Carolina, and a circuitous route to get there in my own personal history. Marcus Garvey said, "A people without knowledge of past origins and culture is like a tree without roots." On these particular trees and these roots, history provides context. As landscape architects, places that you design, the landscapes you work within are not in a vacuum. They have a history from their creator, designer, and those who steward it. It's your job to figure out its history, how it got there, before you can propose where it goes. Back to the trees. Southern Pines, North Carolina. Sandhills region, home of the longleaf pine. A fragile ecosystem, a controlled burn, regenerating Pinus palustris and wiregrass. But that landscape and its management, a controlled burn, not only manages the ecosystem, but it makes possible cultural systems, cultural practices. For over 100 years, home to the Moore County Hounds in the sport of hunt country. Long before that, the ancient forest, trees over 300 years old, employed the tiresome industry of turpentine, the true origins of Tar Heel State, on the backs of the enslaved and marginalized Black workforce. Today, the management of this forest, made possible in part by listing on the National Register of Historic Places, sustains the fragile ecosystem, sustains the cultural practices, and bears witness to an untold chapter in North Carolina history. Every landscape has a history, but not every landscape is equally significant within and across the broad patterns of American history or history period. We need to spend time to understand significance. I'll introduce you to Martha. We'll call her Martha. The concept of Martha needs to die. This is what I thought preservation was when I started practice. I thought the highest pinnacle of a preserved landscape looked like this, and was told by someone who looks like this. I was wrong. When I was sitting where you are, I was able to work for an internship with the National Park Service. At Antietam National Battlefield, the park wanted to restore the North Woods. There were no woods there. I thought maybe as a landscape architect, I had something to contribute to the restoration of place. Along your journey and through my history, who you work for is as important as what you do. Your employers, your clients, and the stakeholders who benefit or are affected by your work. Search them out. Be good to them. Know their history. If you're going to pursue your passion, you might as well do it in something that is of value. I was fortunate to serve for 7 years on the board of the Cultural Landscape Foundation. Charles Birnbaum, with many others, have given this profession back an eye toward its history. But back to history, my history, I never felt that I knew enough to start a design project. I always wanted to know more. I always wanted to know more about history. When you work on the restoration of a masterwork, this is Ellen Biddle Shipman's Wild Garden in DC that we worked on, you get a front row seat to creative genius. You get a front row seat to their thoughts, their writings, their designs, even their selection of file folders. This is Shipman's file folders at Cornell. And through the study, you're changed. You're changed in the process of learning history. Working within and with National Historic Landmarks, World Heritage Sites can be a terrifying proposition, as Glenn will tell you. You better damn well know your homework. Don't screw it up. So understanding history, your mission in the same rigor that you approach analysis today, approach the historic period. And through that, when you design with history and you make possible contemporary uses, you allow places that matter to live on, so they're not loved to death. There is, in fact, over history, meta concepts that must be understood. Change, cause and effect, evidence, context. This is the Central Park Conservancy's request of our office to provide that context as a tool for other park managers. In preservation and Martha, that concept needs to die. Preservation is a misnomer to the layman. Rehabilitation should be the goal. This is the Virginia Capitol Square and my work with Patricia O'Donnell in the redesign of old and new. This is a new plaza for inaugurations. But what if your site is not any particular site? What if the history you're investigating is not a particular history, but many? National commemorations have changed the landscape of America, have changed the profession. In 2018, I was asked to support the America 250 Commission, a congressional commission charged with the commemoration of this nation in 2026. Our proposals made it all the way to the White House, but because of, like everything in Washington, folks just couldn't get along. Remember that quality of client topic I mentioned, working for Congress. I don't recommend it. And I leave you with this. Faulkner said, the past is never dead. In fact, it's not even past. As landscape architects, you possess an unequaled ability to assess and call forward the history, the genius of place. Share that with others. Take that seriously. Thank you.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. Is it ready? Oh.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Getting close. Okay, so I'm going to press this button and it's going to start going, right? All right, and so do I have to stand here? Can I stand over here?
You can walk around
Oh,
the
good.
room. We'll pick it up fine.
All right, I'm a lot more comfortable. So I'll press go. When I press go, I press this one right here, right?
Yep. As soon as you're ready to go, you just go.
Okay, that's what I'll do. Okay, I had to get some last minute instructions. I've never done this before. This is really crazy. In fact, I've got an entire staff back on an island in the Chesapeake Bay that they'd give anything to watch me try and only spend 20 seconds on a slide. They'd have popcorn and they'd be going, this is going to be fun right now. And I do hope it's going to be fun. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my career. I've never really, can we go back? Yeah, I don't want to start yet. I can't do it. I can't do it. This is going to be a riot. I'm just going to be really transparent. I've never really thought of myself as very deep. I'm probably smarter than I think I am, but that would be my mother would say that. This has been fun. I hadn't thought about my career in a long time. At some point, you get into your career where you're just actually just writing bios and you forget things that you did. And so it was kind of fun to go back and go, oh my God, I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and completely forgot I'd been on the planning commission. I have to tell you, when I was sitting in your seats, I thought someday, if I'm ever old and gray with a beard like Ben Johnson, that maybe I would serve on my city's planning commission. I actually thought that would happen. It happened when I was I think in my 30s. And I remember sitting there at a planning commission meeting one day, go, oh my gosh, what do I do now? I got a lot of time left, I think. So anyway, so I've had a great time in my career. My career has been a lot of fun. It's been a little different. I think it'll give you a different perspective. So I'm going to spend half of this program, you saw 10 slides on 20 seconds, whatever they are, talking a little bit about my journey. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about a project that I'm working on. And then I hope we get to ask some questions later. So let's go. Here we go. All right. So, you know, it's interesting. When I first got here into landscape architecture school at Virginia Tech, I remember the professors all wanted to know how I got here. I couldn't draw. I hadn't had any drafting programs, et cetera, and so forth. And apparently I have no technology skills because this computer is not advancing. Is 20 seconds up yet? But I think I have always been a landscape architect, because when I was a kid and we used to have to rake leaves, I used to rake roads and roofs when I was doing my leaves. I was actually in this picture when it happened. But I have learned to be creative, and I have to learn to be desperately creative in order to make sure that I was able to make my projects move forward and be able to sell. One of the things that happened to me early in my career, I had no idea the impact it would have on me, was that between my 4th and my 5th year, I ended up working for the city of Williamsburg in their planning department as an internship. Board of Zoning Appeals, planning commission meetings, and so forth. Had no idea the foundation that was going to land in my life. My advice to you, when you get into programs like that, live in the moment. My first job was in a nursery. 18% interest rates when Ben Johnson kicked me out of school. Nobody had jobs anywhere. I went to go work for a nursery. Me and I learned how to sell plants. I learned how to put plants together. I learned more about plants than I ever learned in the horticulture program here, probably because I wasn't paying attention. Great place. I end up working for an architecture firm. I go to this architecture firm, and they end up with a big project doing a timeshare program. It was the most successful time. We got put in charge of it. Most successful timeshare program ever. They ended up getting a second timeshare program that failed. They brought me out of what I was doing to come and design this. I did golf in the garden. It was so cool. But one of my clients was a real estate developer. And landscape architects, we look down our nose at real estate developers. Well, when a real estate developer comes to you and says, hey, I think you could help me find property. You could help me design places for people to live that would be a cut above everything else. What a way to take your skills and use them. So I became the vice president of a real estate company. Along the way, I got this wacko idea to run for office. And so I did. I ran for the House of Delegates. I will tell you, as a landscape architect, if you want to put together your creative skills, run for office. It was a blast. I had more fun meeting people. And then I get there. And when I get there, I begin to realize how much our skills, in analysis and so forth, as a landscape architect, help us. Also, almost like fate, in the book of Ruth in the Bible, I end up there, and 3 different times the profession of landscape architecture almost gets written out of the Virginia Code. And I am the only person in the position that can work with the lobbyists and others and the other people that help me to get that done. Then it turns around and I get asked to apply for a job. I applied for this job. This is Fortress Monroe. 565 acres of land on an island in the Chesapeake Bay, 2 million square feet of buildings, and 1 water meter for the entire project. It is an absolute nightmare of a utility project. The Army has given this property back to the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is a $500 million hole in the Chesapeake Bay. It is an enormous problem. In addition to being this incredible real estate project, it's also a fascinating utility project. If the Army needed to build a water line, they built a water line. They need to build a sewer line, they built a sewer line. What you're going to see when this 20 seconds is up is what looks like a Gordian knot of all of the utilities that are overlapped. I know it's been 20 seconds. Yeah. So we gave part of the property to the National Park Service just because it wasn't complicated enough. We thought the National Park Service would want it. I wish they had taken the whole thing. This is really interesting. The National Park Service took the grass. They did not take the buildings. They didn't take the roads. They didn't take the fortress. They didn't take the museum. They did put an easement over it. That made it a lot of fun. But for the most part, they just took that. Why didn't they take anything other than the grass? This is what it looks like underneath. So Landscape architects are not engineers, but we're darn close. And especially if you've got involved in building subdivisions and so forth, you begin to understand that this has got to be cleaned up. And so this is $200 million worth of infrastructure that's got to be done all in a way that allows the trees to continue to survive that are there. And then we find out that this is the most significant site in our country for African and African-American history that we've never even talked about before. Imagine this, Africans taken here, get into the Gulf of Mexico and end up at Point Comfort and where they're traded as property in 1619. Governor of Virginia comes to me and says, Glenn, we need to build a memorial to this. I need you to lean into this story. Okay. I don't know if you figured this out yet or not, but I am kind of white. And so this was a little bit of a challenge to do this. So what do? We reach into the stakeholder community. We actually had the stakeholder community identify where they wanted to put the memorial. Then what we did was with the stakeholder community, we reached into the globe and we found artists around the globe and said, anybody interested in building a memorial to those North Africans? Here are some of the criteria that we're looking for. And then we bring guys in there. We end up hiring this gentleman here, Brian Owens. He's a generational artist out of Florida. And as he and I start working on this memorial, we actually did a 5-day listening tour around the state of Virginia, historically Black colleges, et cetera, and so forth, museums, National Park Service sites. Brian comes back and he says, Glenn, we need to tell a story. What if we built a wall, reads from right to left, and we tell the story? We start in Africa. Why are we starting in Africa? He says, Glenn, wake up. They didn't cut, they were standing on the saying, please enslave me. So we meet out in the landscape, we start laying out this wall, we start laying out the sculptures, and I said to Brian, I got this idea. What if we can align all this stuff and we turn the plaza into a pointer? And the pointer is geographically perfectly aligned with the door of no return in Angola, Africa. Now you want to talk about a landscape architect, there you go. We're looking across the ocean, all the way over to Africa. And imagine what we can do with your cell phone now with augmented reality. When you stand there on that line, the plaza extends into the street. We want people to have to experience this, whether they like it or not. It's going to be a rise they're going to go over. Ryan started sketching this out, working with the best scholars in the world we can find. Shows the court. We want the king and his court. We want to show they had commerce, agronomy, education. We want to show they lived. We want to show there was resistance. We want that. And then we want to show the contributions that they made when they came here. They didn't just come with the brawn of their backs. They brought all of this intelligence and this experience with them as well. And then imagine this. The back of the memorial shows the 20 and odd all coming ashore. Brian says these are going to be big figures. I'm going to be able to sculpt into this anguish, anxiety, despair, anger, hurt, pain, suffering will all be sculptured into their faces. This is the memorial as the engineers have designed it. One of the things that we missed was the plaza here, the circles around. There's an African symbol called the Sankofa bird. Look it up. The Sankofa bird is a symbol of looking back. Imagine taking the plaza and incorporating the Sankofa bird into that. And does history matter? I can tell you one thing. It matters to them. In a better manner, matter to us. Really, this is all of our history. I mean, I am angry that I'd be 60 years old before I found out how the first Africans ended up in our country. It's incredible. We think of our history as layers, like sediments in the earth. It's not. It's like a tapestry. It looks beautiful on the front, but behind it, it's all of the strings that make it work. It's all connected. I wish it was easy. It's just not. Anyway, did it. What do you want us to do?
John, tell us.
Yeah, I think we have to have you sitting roughly here for the camera to
Okay.
pick up.
Just before we jump in, and Glenn, thank you. We wanted to share sort of a within history in landscape architecture. So we truly believe, I think, between the two of us, that landscape architects have a superpower in analysis and design synthesis. That history is one element of that. I gravitated toward a very small niche, working only exclusively with that. Glenn, having the benefit of being a steward of a site of international significance, and from a management standpoint to a consultant standpoint, just offering some different perspectives. I came to Asheville, North Carolina, where I am now, by way of graduating here. The Park Service, worked for David Hill here in Southwest Virginia. David's done more for Southwest Virginia, or as much as this program has, indebted to him. Worked for Patricia O'Donnell at Heritage Landscapes, a small national niche firm, woman-owned. I believe it's the smallest recipient of the ASLA Firm of the Year, because the discipline of cultural landscapes is a very small and consultant-based discipline. Then I found my way to Asheville because Vermont was cold and was working.
Asheville isn't?
Asheville's not by comparison. Asheville, we were working at Biltmore with Design Workshop, and I helped to open that office in 2008. When the economics changed, I went back to preservation exclusively and opened my firm, and have been there ever since. So, with that, we have a few questions that we'd like to ask of each other and ask you in the process. Ready to go?
And I'm gonna go ahead and say we've got these questions because, you know, when I was a student there, I just sat there like a bump on the log and I didn't say anything. Y'all should ask us questions. Okay, I mean, we can entertain you and fill our responsibilities for the next hour, but I'd really rather hear any questions that you have. But so we'll get started, but feel free to interrupt us. Okay. So does history matter? If so, how does it matter to the profession of landscape architecture, Glenn?
Yeah, I do believe, as I mentioned, the ability of landscape architects, when you consider all of the design trades, everyone in this building, my experience, landscape architects understand the synthesis of environmental processes, cultural features, and cultural ways, practices better than anyone. You have the ability and the insight and what's being drilled into you. You have the ability to call forward history. We all have a history. I came here from Maryland as a transfer student because I got in-state tuition, because the chair of the architecture department stood me up, and Patrick Miller, the then chair, was there and said, "Hey, why don't you check out landscape architecture," which I was equally interested in. And I found my way here. While I was here, I got married, had a child, and then went directly into practice, to private sector practice. We all have a history. You have a history. When you're working on projects, calling forward the history of those that you're working with gives you an instant connection. The human experience is inseparable. So again, just empower you. History, is history important? I think it's like, is air important? Yes.
Yeah, my experience with history. I've been in Fort Monroe for 12 years. 12 years ago, I would have given you an entirely different answer than I would today. My experience with history in the last 12 years, I've now learned is most of the history that I've ever learned was taught from basically one person's perspective. And no disrespect to my gender and my age or whatever, but usually it's by the victor. Usually that was the rich white guys. You know, I hate saying that, but you know, I've had people criticize me because of my background and what I would still say today, being very transparent, conservative Republican. Go look me up on the internet. You'll find me. I was in the House of Delegates for 12 years and voted 2,000 times a session. So yeah, I can't hide from who I am. And I haven't changed who I am, but I'm angry. I'm a little bit angry that I had to be 60 years old before somebody told me that the first Africans landed at Point Comfort and not at Jamestown. I'm a little bit angry that they weren't I was told things like, "Oh well, it was Africans selling Africans." It was. That's true. But guess what? There were also Portuguese that were funding those Africans. They were giving them better equipment, better supplies, better. Let's just be honest, okay? Let's be honest. And I got to tell you something. I think the job that I'm doing at Fort Monroe, if it was an engineer, I don't think you'd be getting an honest story. No disrespect for engineer guys, but they're going to be trying to figure out how to get the water on bigger pipes and all that kind of stuff. If it was an architect, he's going to be trying to figure out how to turn all these buildings into historic tax credits. I know because I work with architects and engineers. That's what they do. We're different. We tend to see the landscape. I'll close by saying this. When I first took over this job and started to realize, holy cow, what have I got myself into? I found out there was a guy named Bob Wilbur, who was one of the former presidents of Colonial Williamsburg. And he had gone on to go take over Gettysburg, and he saved Gettysburg from becoming a big development project. It was supposed to become, Gettysburg was supposed to become a food court, a mall with a food court, and the food court was going to tell the story of Gettysburg. And so I went and met with him. I'll never forget it. We met at some swanky hotel. I had to meet him there. He gets to stay there. I stayed down the street. I met him $18 for a cup of coffee. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, he said something to me when we got done. He said, Glenn, I got to tell you something. He said, MGM can make the movie, or Warner Brothers or whatever. I don't think MGM exists anymore. But anyway, Spielberg can make the movie. He said, Disney can create the theme park. But he said, but nobody can reproduce the land. Don't ever give up the land. And so that's been our motto at Fort Montier from a $18 cup of coffee. Don't give up the land. And so even now when we're trying to redevelop it, it's all going into long-term leases. So we make sure we can control the property. So history does matter.
Let me ask you,
All right.
what's the most impactful lesson about history that you've learned?
That I just wasn't taught all of it. That was really the part that bugs me. I just wasn't taught all the history. I was taught the part that was easy to understand. I was a dumb fourth grader. It got me through fourth grade, got me into seventh, got me all the way up into sixth grade where we did it again. I just wasn't told a comprehensive story. And I don't like the story. I don't even like it from my Christian perspective. I mean, so we go and capture, and I'm being way too cavalier. I apologize. I swear to God, I pray I'm not offending anybody. But we go and capture Africans, okay, and take them down the river, put them in a castle on the coast. And the first thing that happened to them was they got baptized and given Christian names. That's horrible. That is horrible. I have nothing I can do about it. But how do I feel now that I know the story? A lot different. Well, tell me, my perspective is tell me more. Tell me more. We talk about when the first Africans landed at Point Comfort, they were enslaved. They were not enslaved. Well, here we go again, trying to whitewash the story. No, we're not whitewashing the story. They were captured and put on a pirate ship. Pirate ship brought them here and traded them for supplies. They did not have an agency. So what happens? They get to work with the indentured servants. 2 indentured servants run away. White guys. Black guy runs away with them. They get captured. They get brought back. They get sent to the court. Do I need to tell you who's running the courts? Guess what the 2 white guys get? They get more years added to their servitude. What does the black guy get? He becomes the first slave in our country. They used our courts and our laws to sentence him to a lifetime of servitude. So again, I know this is a history lesson. I apologize for that, but I'm just trying to emphasize: as landscape architects, I feel like we're trained to be open-minded, and we're trained to want to know more, dig more. So that's what I've learned about history. Your thoughts?
It's a treat to sit here with you, and through your pen ups, through your education, I always point this out. Sitting next to someone like Glenn who can articulate well, you're getting a degree also in public speaking. Make sure you get a degree in research. At the same time, make sure you get a degree in writing. At the same time you're drawing, because your ability to communicate what you learn, what you know, what you synthesize together, again, is a power, is a strength that no other profession in the design arts has at the strength that you have. So what's the most impactful lesson? I go back to the land. And again, because I work within the very small, specific, only with historic sites in different places, the construct, even the language that we have to assess our history over time, we don't yet have the language to do all of that. And it's because it's been told by Martha. So we need more people to participate in the research and understanding of history. Folks say, we don't want revisionist history. History is always revised because more is learned, more is understood. But I'll say this, the land is the common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot take a historic site and put it somewhere else conveniently because there's a development project or there's another issue or concern. It's immovable. So when my office talks to archaeologists and architectural historians that say, well, the archaeological record has been disturbed, we're not sure this site retains its integrity. Yes, it absolutely retains its integrity of its setting, of its location, of the place where history happened. In Virginia, it's often talked about, and when I came here, I was not used to this, but the American Civil War, 123. That's enough. 123 battlefields on Virginia soil. The next closest state is Tennessee with 34.
Wow.
So even with that, the question is, isn't every acre in Virginia significant to the American Civil War? Isn't it historic? And my answer is yes, every landscape has a history, but not every landscape has the same level of significance, in that case, to that war, or in Glenn's case, to the broader narrative of history. So.
I would also add, in addition to the land, I would say words matter. There were times when especially when I first got to Fort Monroe, I'm probably fortunate I just didn't get thrown in the bay, and as high tide was carried me out to the ocean. I would talk about how Captain John Smith landed at Point Comfort in 1607, and I would go on with my story, only to be reminded at the end of my speech that, oh, by the way, the Indians were here for a couple thousand years before that, Glenn. Wow. I mean, I feel like, give me a V8. Y'all don't know that, of course. Anyway, it was just crazy, that I would just skip over. I think history began when white guys showed up. I remember when we talked about the contraband who escaped and came to Fort Monroe, and I refer to them as they stole a boat and rowed across the harbor. Really? Really? Somebody stole their freedom? And you're going to talk about how they stole a boat? Well, what's the matter with you? I'd have been a better husband if I had figured this out a long time ago. But words matter. Choose them carefully, and create a space where people can dialogue with you about this. Don't feel like you don't think you know everything, and be humble and be willing to learn.
I'd be interested to know what's your perspective on history. Are you incorporating it?
No.
How are you synthesizing it?
Yeah.
Me and 3 other studio mates last semester.
Speak up.
Excuse me. Me and 3 other studio mates last semester did a whole entire project in Roanoke. Basically, what happened is we looked at why there's so much flooding within Roanoke, and long story short, we found out about the history of Roanoke itself and the river that flew through it. And how they buried the river, all the long history with that, and how that influences the current problems they're facing today. So that was really interesting to me to look back at the history and really tell a story of what the future design of it could look like. So that's one way that me and my studio mates have incorporated history into design.
Anyone else?
We just spend enough time talking about history in our profession.
No, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I believe Ian McHarg and other greats did the profession a great in really supplanting landscape architects as the synthesizers, the profession that analyzes the environment and looking at natural processes, layers, and the integration of natural processes. I personally don't believe we've done the same thing with culture and history, and that we should. Because those natural processes, even as you talked about, the paving over of rivers and the mindset behind that is part of our history and our culture. Why did we do that? And understanding those things together, I think are inseparable. So I don't think we talk about it enough as a profession.
And we don't talk about it from enough perspectives. So I don't have the video to show you of so we did a simulation of the African Land Memorial, just trying raise money for it and tell people the concept. And I had a landscape architecture firm and that I worked with, and together we did the design for the memorial. It was the coolest plaza, second coolest plaza you've ever seen. But then when we went out, I have to go through public procurement in order to hire my engineer. I'm convinced that the landscape architecture firm that I've been working with is going to have the inside track and they're going to get this. But the reality of it is they didn't get it. They didn't come back with the best proposal, and I regret it. But we didn't end up picking them. We picked this other firm, and the principal in the firm is a black man, and he is a landscape architect, and his price was so expensive I wasn't going to hire him. It was 3 times what we were going to pay the other firm, and I just couldn't stomach it. And so I was on the phone call where I was going to tell him we weren't going to hire him. We were going to the other firm. He quickly sent me that sketch that I showed you, where I talked about the line to Angola and the Sankofa bird and elongate. That was a round circle. He elongated it, stuck it into the road, and then he included the Sankofa bird. And all of a sudden I realized, 99 people who go to this plaza are not going to get the Sankofa bird at all. But to the one person who does, or to the National Park Service or Fort Monroe Authority interpreter who explains that to them, how much deeper is this experience going to be when they recognize what they're standing on? So yes, and then so the relevance of all that, having more voices at the table is a good thing.
Just an observation. Question. Anybody have aspirations of working for the National Park Service? Maybe. Okay. So I'll just share with you what I learned early on. I'm a student, an intern, and they give us this project and figure out what the composition of the Northwoods was. This is America's bloodiest day. I think it's 36,000 casualties in one day. American Civil War. The Northwoods was the opening curtain of that bloodbath. Figure out where it was, its composition, what was included through research, and propose something that's sustainable for us to manage. So, perfect. And by the way, see if you can figure out where Clara Barton was. You don't know? You're the National Park Service. Haven't you figured this out yet? And I think, like design, and I recall David Hill telling me this, the pursuit of design is an inexhaustible effort. You're always chasing excellence. You're really never finished. And I would say the same is true of history. As you're researching, I have to condense what I think can be digested, what I can present, what will truly matter, because it's inexhaustible. We haven't figured it out yet. Even the National Park Service, we didn't know where Clara Barton was 25 years ago, is still figuring this out. So, what tools do landscape architects possess to assess history or context?
Well, I think we mentioned it. For me, I'm somewhat repeating myself, but the land. Nobody understands. I know I'm a proud landscape architect. I'm sorry. I just don't think I've worked with engineers and other professions and so forth. Nobody understands the land the way we do. Archaeologists come really close. I love the archaeologists that I work with. One thing I learned about archaeologists is they cover everything up. They dig it up, they show it to you, and then they cover it back up again. It frustrates the living daylights out of me. I want to do something with it. But the land is the real opportunity of our profession, and your ability to start with what you know. Analysis was a big deal for me. That's how I got through college, and quite frankly, it's carried me through my whole career. Start with what you know, and then build on it. Start with the shape of the land. Start with the contours. Start with the open space. Start with the trees. Start with the structures. Start with what you know, and just keep building on it. And it's almost like a detective, on a homicide. It will tell you what it can be and where the truth is.
I'd echo that. I think process, the very same process that you all are going through right now. So you're looking at a site, identifying, as Glenn said, start with, hydrology, circulation, spatial character, construct, vegetation, small scale design features, pedestrian, vehicular, all of that applied to the historical periods. You have the ability to do that. What we do, and we've just begun to share this more, because one thing that you realize is no one else has that process that you have, very few. But sharing that process, inviting others into that process, builds support, builds investment and engagement in the final product. But we lay out everything we can find. We find historic aerial photography.
Yep.
We find historic maps. Then we find ground photography. We lay that out. What's the timeline? What's the evolution of that landscape? Then we look at historic accounts. Do they tell us when things change? And then we sit down and we write what we're seeing for circulation. What are we seeing for views and vegetation? What are we seeing for topography? When does it change? Doing that through the periods of history give you a clear sense of how a property, its physical form, has evolved. And that, again, those are skill sets that you have now. Just reach back further into history. And that changes across whether it's a historic site, which may be significant, again, back to the significance word, to one event or one person's occupation there, or it may be a historic design landscape, which has another closer period of significance that ends when that design begins to deteriorate. So again, looking at those periods, but using the same analysis skills that you have now. But I'll say that the language, when I first got on the board of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, the foundation had been newly formed. I think it was 3 or 4 years old. And all of the projects that were being presented, shared, were historically designed landscapes. And the conversation was, when are we getting to the broader context of cultural landscapes, of ethnographic sites, of historic sites, specific, of vernacular sites? And that evolution is happening. And look at the Cultural Landscape Foundation. If you don't use it as a resource, I'd recommend that you do. You can look up great designers of our trade and understand where they've worked and find places and go out and see their work, what's left of it. So again, all tool sets, but again, you have those tools as we invite more people in to identify what's significant. I think the language of preservation will change.
Yeah. You mentioned cultural landscape. So let me throw this out there as a practical observation that I had the other night, and you tell me whether or not this is what you're talking about. So the city of Hampton's coastal city, they got some big giant grant to measure sea level rise and defend their shores and all that kind of stuff. And so I get put on this commission. And the only reason I'm going there is because I'm going to go defend my property, make sure they don't do something crazy with my 565 acres of the bay. And then one of the maps that that they're looking at has to do with tree canopies. And it's pretty obvious that the areas where there's the least tree canopy are the areas where the low income families, Hampton's the oldest continuously English speaking city in our country. So it has a lot of old housing. And remember all the contrabands, 10,000 people tried to escape to Fort Monroe. They couldn't all fit at Fort Monroe. They overflowed into the city of Hampton and built contraband camps. Those contraband camps became communities. And so their communities have the least amount of shade cover. So what do we as landscape architects do about that? And how do we, being aware of it, being sensitive? So anyway, that was just a practical experience that I ran through the night. I really would encourage all of you. This was a real moment for me that I just didn't understand. I did not realize how much my career was going to take me into government. I don't know how you do this profession without getting involved in government. You are going to be a spokesman for the rest of your lives on laws, zoning, master plans, comprehensive plans. Every city has to do a comprehensive plan. You know what you want to do? you want to make sure you volunteer to be a citizen on the citizen team, meet your local city manager, meet your city council person, and say, when you do your 5-year comprehensive plan, I'd like to be on the committee. That's what you want to do, because nobody's going to look at it the way you're going to look at it. And so get involved in it. And that's where the cultural landscape is going to come into play.
What relevance does history hold for the profession's future?
I think it's opportunity. I mean, nobody else is looking at this like we are. I mean, when I think of all of the design teams that were working with me on this memorial, nobody included the St. Copenberg, except for the landscape architect. Nobody thought of the line to Angola, except for a landscape architect. So huge opportunity for us to get involved and bring different perspectives to the design profession. So I think this should be added to your quiver, another arrow in your quiver. Be aware of history, talk to historians, include historians, on your team. And just like you do an environmentalist, just like you do a soil scientist, just like you do any of the other professions, the historian should be part of your team, and you should be looking for opportunities to make the design through the experience of history.
So I'll answer that. What relevance does history hold? And I think it's in the same vein. I'm on the board of the licensure board in North Carolina for landscape. So who wants to be licensed as a landscape architect? Hope it's everyone in here.
Oh, look at that. Good job, guys.
We asked the question, what does licensure look like in North Carolina? We didn't have an answer. We had very little data. What we had was given to us from CLARB, the Council of Landscape Architecture Registration Boards. This is sort of the national convening body of all licensure boards. What we learned, we did a survey. We worked with ASLA and said, we want to survey our licensees, those who are already licensed. We want to survey those who are ASLA members, those that are practicing within the periphery of landscape architecture, but not licensed. And we want to talk to the graduates of our programs. What are the barriers to licensure? What are the barriers to becoming licensed? You have education, the exam, the LARE, and working for a licensed landscape architect. Those three things together, and alternative pathways. What we learned is those pathways are not yet fully developed. We learned we're losing minorities and we're losing women along the way to licensure. Even though in North Carolina, we have the only historically Black college and university undergraduate program in the nation, the number of practicing African Americans in landscape architecture in North Carolina is less than 1%. How can that be? How can we identify what the roadblocks are? I hope, one, in addition to history, that as you pursue licensure, you stay in contact with the program, that they stay in contact with you and identify any barriers. I think history, we're talking about the history of our profession, and you're the future. The history of this profession has not addressed barriers to licensure, has not addressed all the things that we do as landscape architects that aren't directly related to health, safety, and welfare, which is right now the only thing that licensure by and large cares about. And part of that is because they can go up to the Hill and say, no, we protect public health, safety, and welfare. But we never get to the next part of everything else that we're doing. So to have Glenn, to have someone that's an advocate of the profession, in the position that you were, I did some design there, but they won't, the truth is, as a landscape architect, you'll do the designs and then in 5 years, they won't let you in the building, but they let you in the building. But I think you are the future. We need to look at the past of this profession. I don't believe cultural landscapes or history should be a specialization. I am right now because there just aren't enough of us. And it's also new. Cultural landscapes and the policies for looking at a historic landscape really only began and were codified in the 1990s. Prior to that, it was just buildings and archaeology. And I share the opinion among my archaeologist friends. They're like librarians. They would love for you to come and look at the books, but they really don't want you to check them out. So just
We'll cover it back up.
so last question.
Yeah.
Almost done. Are we making history as a profession? How might we, what metrics would support this?
You know, when I was a legislator, people would say, Glenn, what's your legacy going to be? I was like, how do I know my legacy? That's like in the future. I'm just trying to get by. I'm trying to get reelected. I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do. And I feel the same way about, you know, am I making, or are we as landscape architects making history? I think the number one problem for a landscape architect is make a living. You know, trying to figure out, okay, how are you going to go and make enough money to live off of and so forth. I think that as we do our work, as we do it well, as we excel in it, I think that that the work that you're doing will be historic. I think everybody in here is capable of doing something that is historic, and it's meaningful. And I look at this memorial for the first Africans, and I remember when I was a young boy growing up in the 60s. My father was a dock worker from the oil refinery. My brother was 11 years older than I was. He's getting ready to get drafted into the Vietnam War. A history lesson for you. We used to sit in our living room with a little metal TV tray watching a big giant black and white console. And the evening news was the Vietnam War, the body bags, and the race riots in Greensboro and other places. And my little brain was getting wired with all the things that my father and my brother were arguing over. I didn't realize it, but that's what was happening. As an adult, I want to go to the Vietnam Memorial, you know, designed by somewhat of a landscape architect, someone who's sensitive to the land, and to go see her design. And I'm walking down that sidewalk. As the sidewalk's going down and the black wall is coming out of the ground, all of a sudden the names begin to appear. And I start thinking to myself, oh my God, it's in my brain. It's like it's overheating. It's like all the little wire and bug nuts that got put together are all just popping off, because it's not about politics or policies or practices of war. It's about people and their lives and how they were changed forever. You know, what if, in my case, what if we could build a memorial at Point Comfort, you know, at Port Monroe in Hampton, Virginia, that would be a pilgrimage for people around the world to come to. And when they come to it, that they would begin to think differently than the way they were taught. See reality that they had never been told to them before. So is that historic? I don't know. Well, I'll let history decide. But I know that that's the kind of projects and that's the kind of impact that we as landscape architects, we are the perfect profession to lead a project. We just look at the big picture. So I hope each of you are inspired to look at the big picture, focus on learning analysis of your projects, focus on government. You really need to get involved. It's the one thing I missed. My profession would have started much sooner if, when I was in your seats, if I was going on the city website, looking at the city council agendas, looking at the planning commission agendas, looking at the board of zoning appeals agendas, and every now and then going, oh, they're talking about Farmer Smith's property. I want to go hear that one, and go to the meeting. It's well worth your time.
I think we talked enough about the analysis of history, and I do think, and I hope we can empower you to harness history as one element of culture as you look at your designs. I do believe the future of the profession, making history, is in the voice of the environment, but that has to be equaled by voice of culture. Cultural sustainability, environmental sustainability, one and the same, and letting that be one conversation instead of separate. But I'll add, just in terms of your personal history, some of you are graduating. Who's graduating this year? Okay. Yay. Congratulations, one. You're going out into a big world. You've learned to see the world differently. I've learned through the scope of my practice, being an employee of a firm, learning as much as I can as a general practitioner, still holding on to what I love, but be a good general practitioner and develop your skills in what you love. Going from there to a consultant, very different set of skill sets, and that's a leap in and of itself, learning to run your own business and establishing a business that you can invite others into. These are all things that you won't and you can't be expected to learn here, but they're a part of your future history. They're a part of your trajectory. But I will say you've learned to see the world differently, and what a great place to do it. And it's an honor to be here and call you all friends and future alumni as a part of this family. So thank you to the faculty for the foundation that you all give us.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today.